Well, hello, Megan. Welcome to the Passionista podcast. I am so excited that you are here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I got to come on your podcast and we got to talk about all things faith and feminism. I am expecting the same here today. We're going to just get into it. We're going to talk about the F word for sure.
Yes, we are.
The F word, the elusive, crazy F word. But before we do that, for the listeners, just tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Megan. I currently host a podcast called Faith and Feminism. I run a Facebook group. I run a blog. I'm actually working on getting a book published right now. I just had a meeting this weekend with industry professionals, and it's looking promising. So hopefully I can get that book published soonish, or at least get a book contract soonish. But yeah, so I was a missionary for several years and worked with sexually exploited women. And through working with them, I discovered that the root of their oppression was actually inequality. And so I really felt like it was my role to fight the demand.
So good. So where were you a missionary at?
All over. So I originally did this program called the World Race. It's an 11-country, 11-month mission trip. And so I was obviously all over the world. And month one, I was actually in Ireland and had our contact there tell us basically that women's voices were not appreciated or needed in the church, and that we were to be seen but not heard. And so that was really hard to hear, even though that was kind of the things I grew up with. And for the rest of the months, I went to Kenya after that and encountered female genital mutilation. After that, I was working with women who had been trafficked in India and Thailand and Cambodia and Nepal, just all over the world. And so after I worked with all of these women, my eyes were really opened to the fact that number one, that, like I said, their oppression was not rooted in lust or anything like that. It was actually rooted in the fact that these women were not viewed as equals. So you could buy them because they were an object, or you could mutilate them because their bodies were not as important as a man, or you could, silence their voices because their voices didn't matter. And so I realized that again and again, that the root of their oppression was actually inequality. And the very institution, that I am a believer, still a Christian, was contributing to this inequality by not allowing women to preach or teach. And that was my experience month one. So I just really felt like God's like, Megan, there's women all around the world that are facing oppression, and you faced it too. This is, I've been sexually assaulted. I've been told my voice doesn't matter. I've been told that my only viable option is to be a housewife. But I really had to, just press through this and realize that God had more for me. And so that's why I started Faith and Feminism, because I honestly believe God's heart is to empower women. And I think if we bring empowerment and talk about feminism, which I'm going to define it for you right now, is
yes, because I know there's probably some people on the other end. They're like, oh, they're getting so anxious. She's talking about feminism, evil feminism, right? Feminism has been blamed for everything under the planet. Let's see, the break of the family, abortion, everything.
Yes, and so we're just gonna go to the dictionary right now to define feminism for those who are listening. The feminism dictionary definition is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. So basically it's equality. I know people have different understandings of what feminism is, but that's ultimately not what it is. And so I hear a lot of the time, well, Megan, how can you call yourself a feminist? There's evil feminists out there. And I'm like, there's evil Christians out there.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Westboro Baptist Church, or let's talk about the crusades the Christian church did and murdered people. Let's talk about people who, you know, are white supremacists and go shooting people and then like claim Christianity. Ku Klux Klan was actually a Christian organization. So
let's talk about the Holocaust.
Right. Let's talk about, there's seriously so many things that unfortunately Christianity has done wrong, or extremist Christians, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm not claiming everything that has come from the feminist movement is good, but I'm saying the definition of feminism is right and holy in God's intention. And so I also feel that for the church, you know, we define ourselves as Christ followers. So we're not abandoning the term Christianity because there's a bad name out there. And I feel the same way about feminism. I'm not going to abandon the term of what it means just because people have a misunderstanding of what it is.
Absolutely. It's a judgment. Yeah. It's a judgment or a perspective that you've placed on a label. And what if we could approach situations, Christianity, feminism, what if we could just look at each other and say, I want to understand where you're coming from.
Right.
You know, I may not agree with you, but I want to understand. I want to find common ground. I want to know what the world is like through your eyes. I want to know what you say and what you experience. And, you know, Megan, you and I have so much in common. You actually are from Athens, Georgia. Is that correct? Or you live there now?
I live there now. I'm actually from Colorado, but yes, I live in Athens
okay.
now.
So it's so funny. And the reason I bring that up, because I know you guys are probably like, well, that was random, Lindsay. But it's odd because God will like orchestrate you with people who you can learn from and who you need to be and who you need to hear from. And I actually grew up in Athens, Georgia when I was very little. And so I think that that's so cool. And then I also have a background with working with women, with victims of sex trafficking. I ran a nonprofit for 4 years that did that locally. And I think, Megan, that what I'm hearing you say is that when you really see what patriarchy and inequality has done through the eyes of someone who has been horrifically abused and objectified, and then you see it over and over and over and over again, and then also bring your experience to the table, you cannot sit here and say that we do not have a problem. That we don't have a problem with equality in the world today.
Right.
I mean, and that's one of the things that you'll hear so many people say. It's like, oh, like, it's like we want to minimize.
Right.
Like, oh, everyone's treated equal. And it's typically a white male that's saying that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're like, well, I have, or tell me if you've experienced this, Megan, sometimes it's almost the females that will come against, you know, the whole feminism and equality worse than the males. It's like they've been brainwashed. I'm like, are you kidding?
Oh, absolutely. I've actually had worse experiences with, I've had bad experiences with,
you know, they'll say, well, I'm not oppressed. Yeah. So I've never experienced that. Like, come on. Like, are you really like, you know, you really think that's such an issue? I'm like, yes. And I'm like, you don't know. I'm like, just because you think you're not oppressed, or like you haven't experienced this, doesn't mean that it's not happening. I'm like, spend some time with a domestic violence victim, like I have.
Right.
Spend some time with a victim of sex trafficking. Spend some time with that. Then you're like, your whole world is going to change. So like, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think sometimes, you know, this happens with women?
Well, I have many theories on it. One of my most prominent theories is a lot of the people that I hear it from are from the older generation. And I'm betting that they had a call to step out in empowerment. I'm betting that that was something they were supposed to do, but ultimately they, you know, sacrificed a lot to remain silent. And so there's something called confirmation bias. Once you make your mind up about something, you have to confirm it and defend it. And so I think
say that again.
Okay. So there's something called confirmation bias, where once you make a decision, even after whatever happens, you have to defend it no matter what happens. And so if we look at the, you know, election with Trump, a lot of people who initially voted for him, I don't think fully foresaw what his presidency was gonna look like. And even though, you know, he's saying that windmills cause cancer and God knows what else. They continue to defend him because they already made a decision when they voted for him. And so they don't want to be wrong. So they're going to continue to defend a man who's not ultimately, in my opinion, good for our nation.
Right. And that can happen in like so many other situations
Right.
too. Like I'll give you an example from my life. When I was a police officer, I used to work prostitution stings.
Yeah.
Like I can't get away from this. So what would happen is like, you know, me or another person would like pretend to be a prostitute. Okay.
Yeah.
And it would be like, you would see like these, like, the wife or the women would get furious and they would, defend their husband, like that it was a setup or a sting, or like, you know, he wasn't like really going to do it. It's like almost like part denial. Like we don't want to own our stuff. We don't just want to own like we made a mistake. We don't want to own that I'm maybe married to someone who has a problem with sex addiction, or I like we just can't own our stuff without shame. Like what if we can just say, hey, I made a wrong choice here.
Yeah. I mean, I think the world would be such a better place. And if you even look at politicians who make mistakes, if they just said, hey, I actually screwed up and I apologize for that. I'm going to try everything I can to do better in the future. But people are unfortunately afraid to do that. And so I think the world would be in such a better place if people could just admit when they were wrong and learn from their mistakes.
Absolutely. Like that confirmation bias is such a phenomenon to watch. You know, we watch it all over social media.
Yeah.
And it's really what I believe is like a spirit of religion, which I feel like is demonic, you know, when we see all of this happening. And I think a lot of people too, when they view feminism, I'm like, I don't know where in the world this come from. It's like when they view feminism, it's like, oh, I'm not a victim.
Yeah.
Like, what? You know, it's like there's a difference between you like on it, like looking at the world and saying, we have a problem here.
Yeah.
And that historically, since the dawn of humanity, women have been oppressed. And just because someone is being oppressed doesn't mean that they have a victim mentality. It doesn't mean that they're like whining and crying. Like just because you use your voice and you speak out and you say, this is an issue that we need to work together to solve, doesn't mean you're a victim.
Right. And I mean, let's even look at the statistics. Like globally, 1 in 3 women will be beaten or sexually abused in their lifetime. 1 in 5 will be raped. 70% of the world's poorest people are women, and they hold less than 1% of the world's titled land. 2/3 of the 77.4 million illiterate people are female because girls are often denied an education. Of the 40.3 million slaves alive today, 75% of them are women and girls. White women on average make 80 cents to the man's dollar, and that gap continues to increase for women of color. So I could literally
like, those are facts.
Right. I could talk all day just with facts from, you know, reputable sites from, you know, United Nations, UNESCO, all of these things. It's just a fact. There's inequality in the United States and globally. And if we even look at the Bible, I think what people misinterpret. So you go back to Genesis, and in the beginning, like God made man and woman, and it was good, and they're meant to be co-heirs and equals. Okay, that is in the Bible, co-heirs and equals. And so then the curse is delivered, and it says that a woman will, her desire will be for her husband, and her husband will rule over her. You guys, that's a curse. This is not God's plan. This is clearly a curse. And we're like celebrating it and telling people that our husbands are supposed to rule over us.
And I'm like, guys, and guess what? Yeah. Guess who broke the curse?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Right.
Death, burial, and resurrection broke the curse. Like, so you don't have to live like that anymore.
Right. Yeah. But it's like people don't understand that. They're like, so many Christians, I get told all the time to submit to my husband, you know, and there is totally mutual submission. Absolutely. But he is not my ruler. He is not my head. He's not those things to me. And I have all of the theology to back it up. We're not going to get into it now, but I have on my podcast, I'm doing a series on theology that like explains and talks about all of this. But all of that to say, like, this patriarchy that we live in, and every country in the world, or most countries. I think it's residual in even the countries that are most empowered. So say Iceland, they are the best nation to be a woman. They have more women in government. They have more equal pay, all of these things that they're fighting for women's equality. But again, the fact is that they're still fighting for it. Like the the default that we start at is women are oppressed, women are subordinate, women don't have equal rights. And so we can see that patriarchy is a curse all over the world. And I honestly think it's God's call for us to break that patriarchy and to really fully empower men and women as co-heirs and equals. And we can't do that if we keep on telling women they can't talk in church, or they can't sing, or they can't do this, or they can't do that. Because we honestly need both images of God. Man and woman were created in the image of God to really bring kingdom to this earth.
Absolutely. Girl, just go on ahead and preach. Just do it. Yeah. And guys, like if what we're saying right now, because I know I have listeners from all different seasons and places and denominations in their faith, or maybe you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Go listen to Meghan's podcast on faith and feminism. Like, go dive into the theology, be open-minded, like be willing to put aside your confirmation bias, be open, like be willing to, like, is it possible that maybe some things have gotten misconstrued? Like, is it possible that maybe the Bible has been used, sadly, in many circles to suppress, to control, to silence, instead of to liberate and empower and give a voice to? And, I don't know about you, Meghan, I want you to share for sure, because I know you talked about the missionary work, that was like the beginning maybe of like your feminism journey. I don't know. Like maybe what were some other milestones for me? A big milestone for me was reading the book by Sarah Bessey called Jesus Feminist. Like, that turned my world upside down. It totally rocked my socks off. And I love the way that she explained that. And I want all the listeners to know too, that like, we're talking about doing this together. Men and women are not against each other. They're for each other. No one sex is better than the other. They're different. We add we need each other. We need both perspectives, and we were created to rule and reign together alongside of. In fact, I'm glad you brought up Genesis. I talk a lot about this in my course. The word helper, helpmate, that's ezer kenegdo, which means to come alongside of. In the Hebrew, it means to come alongside of and add value to. And it's actually a military term.
Right.
It's a military term to come alongside of, like in a military sense. Like, we're meant to rule and reign together, and women are created to be powerful. And sometimes we just like need to get our power back. So Meghan, tell us, what were some other milestones on your journey with feminism?
Yeah. Well, to kind of, before I get into that, to piggyback on ezer kenegdo, that term is like used, I don't remember the exact number, so you probably should Google this, but it's like that word is used like 86 times in the Bible, and like a good portion of that is used to refer to God.
Yeah.
So like God, so like, so many people don't think that, there's the feminine aspect of God, but there absolutely is, because I could go on about this. There's actually a podcast episode if you want to hear all of the things, but basically that God is referred to as an ezer, and so we're women. So like this lesson, like that was actually a term that God used to define himself. So anyways, but yes, I can talk about my journey. So honestly, it started on the playground in kindergarten. I have always been outspoken and athletic and kind of just confident, I guess, as a kid. And so when I was a little kid, I would want to play like sports with the boys, and they were like, oh, you can't play, you're a girl, or whatever. And I'm like, well, watch me, and I'll run faster than you, and I'll beat you in the push-up contest. And I did beat them in the push-up contest. And I really was frustrated even at a young age that I was told I couldn't do something because of my body parts. And so as I got older, unfortunately, I was in a really conservative church, and basically they told me that I was not accepted unless I was quiet and submissive and silent. And so unfortunately, for a long time, I tried to be all of those things. God, I tried so hard. But like I said, I'm naturally competitive and have all these quote unquote masculine traits. And so as I grew older, God just really like stirred in me, like, Megan, there's more to this. There's more to this. And so I remember the first time I really challenged this, I was in college. I read a book called Why Not Women by Lauren Cunningham, which is the founder of YWAM. That was my first experience with it. And then I continued to read and study. And so Jesus Feminist helped me along that journey. But like I said, it really came to a head when I went around the world and saw how damaging inequality was. Like, literally, it's a life and death situation. You know, so when I encountered those young women in Kenya who were being mutilated, those women would often bleed to death on their way home after this procedure that wasn't done without anesthesia, without any medical training. And so literally that was a life and death situation. And we can talk about human trafficking. So I've worked with women from India to Thailand to the Philippines. And I actually, unfortunately, one of my friends was actually murdered by a client in the sex trade. So like, it is a life and death situation. Women are constantly exposed to violence in the sex trade. They oftentimes feel disposable. Like, I'm just buying her. She's an object, so I can do what I want with her. I can be violent. I can rape her. I can do all of these things with her. And so it was finally when I saw this extreme oppression that I was able to like say, like, that's wrong. Like, whatever, you can tell me to be silent or whatever, but this is really wrong. And as I was able to develop my voice against those injustices, I started to stand up for myself as well. And so I thought, you know, when I was a kid and, you know, told to cover up, I remember one of the first times I was sexually assaulted. I was 13 years old, and I was on a mission trip, and I was wearing like my fit, you know, you're awkward when you're 13, and, you know, just wear the same clothes every day. So I had the same shirt that I wore every day. Well, maybe not every day, but most days. And it was like what I felt comfortable in. But I guess if I rose my hands in the air, a little bit of my midriff would show. So my youth pastor said that, you know, I was going to make men stumble or do bad things. So he asked me to change my shirt, and I did. But later that week, I was I think we were in Tijuana, and I was lagging behind the group because I had like stopped to pet a stray dog. And when I got up, this stranger just came in, grabbed my breast and twisted it in his hand. And I was wearing baggy clothes. Like, I didn't know what happened. And so I like freaked out and ran and caught up with the group, but I didn't tell anyone because, number one, I thought it was my fault because it must have been something I did because my body is shameful and makes men do bad things. I didn't want to bring shame on myself. I didn't, you know, so I carried the secret for like 13 years before I told anyone. And so like, that's just an example of like, we in the church put this shame on women's bodies that absolutely contributes to things like sexual assault. So, you know, I didn't tell anyone. You wonder why people don't speak up when
because they're shamed when they do. Because they're told it's their fault.
Or they're not believed. And then on top of that, telling women that their bodies are the problem is so ridiculous because women in burqas, no matter what a woman is wearing, she is like, you know, is likely to be catcalled or harassed or even raped. It doesn't matter what a woman is wearing because ultimately it's not what a woman is wearing. It's a man taking something that isn't his, thinking a woman's body belongs to him.
Exactly.
And so we have got it so backwards in the church, or at least purity culture has got it so backwards. Let's empower men to use their brains and treat women with dignity and realize that they have self-control. Like, I'm not responsible for your thoughts. I can wear leggings. I can wear whatever I want. You are in charge of your mind. I am not responsible for that. And so I think it's not only dangerous to have that mindset for women because, gosh, I've been grabbed by strangers at least 5 times. At least my private parts have been grabbed by strangers at least 5 times. And so this is in America, this is all over the world. This is not like an uncommon phenomenon. Most women I've talked to have been assaulted in this way. So it's dangerous for women, but on top of that, it's makes men seem like weak
victims.
Yeah, weak, spineless creatures that just can't help it if they see a body that they have to do something about it. And so unfortunately, this kind of victim blaming mindset is all over the world. Several years ago in India, a woman was raped to death because she wore pants. She was with a man, they knocked out her companion and raped her, like these 5 men raped her to death. And when they interviewed the rapist, like, why did you do this? And it was on a public bus, by the way, so no one stopped it. Wow. And they said, well, good girls don't wear pants. And that was what most of them said, was like, I'm justified in this because she wore pants. And so like, yeah, because women, the good girls don't wear pants in India, or at least this part of India. Wow. And so you can see that this mindset is all over the world.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. So
good girls don't fill in the blank is the issue.
Right. And here's the thing. I've always been a good girl. I waited until I was married to have sex. I didn't like my boyfriends touch me anywhere. Like we'd only kiss and that was it. And yet I was sexually assaulted at least 5 times, sexually harassed all the time. And the only thing that made me vulnerable to it was the fact that I was a woman. And it's something I can't control. I'm a woman. Yeah. It makes me,
God made me this way. I didn't choose.
Yeah. Right. And so I really just don't think that's God's heart at all. I think God really does want men to value women and stop putting their sins on what someone else is wearing.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up the issue of self-control, because I'm always wondered, it was always like, don't cause them to stumble, be sensitive, that men are wired differently. I'm like, are they? Like, I'm like, do you not think that women struggle too? Like nobody's saying anything about the man wearing a shirt that's 5 sizes too small, or, you know what I'm saying? Like a man has no issue like taking a picture without his shirt off, but if a woman shows up in a bikini, or shows any type of cleavage, you know what I'm saying? It's like, then she's a whore, or you're not being modest, and it's just like, the modesty police drive me insane, because I think it is so shaming of women. It's shaming of our sexualities. And it's like, I'm sorry, do somehow women have a fruit of the Holy Spirit that men don't? Like, did that get lost somewhere? Like self-control. Like, do you not have the same Holy Spirit that I have? Because you're a man? Like, I don't get it. It's like, it's just insane. And I think, like, what if we could all look at each other as human beings who have equal value, who were made in the image of God, and that doesn't have to be a power struggle, but a power union.
Right.
And, so, okay, Meghan, so tell us, like, what are some practical ways that we can empower women, that maybe like some conversations, like good conversations women can start, like maybe with men in their lives, or do you have any like advice for us?
Oh, absolutely. I have all the advice. Number one, I think the most powerful thing you can do is empower yourself. Absolutely.
Say it again.
The most powerful thing you can do is empower yourself. Yes. So I actually had this vision from God of like, or picture, whatever you want to call it, of like me getting up on this platform and pulling women up with me. And the thing is, I can't pull women up with me unless I already got up there and was willing to stand out like a sore thumb. And so
that's so good.
I can think of so many people, but specifically there's one woman, her name is Adrielle Booker. So I was a missionary in YWAM for a little bit, and she was one of my teachers. And I just followed her on social media afterwards because I thought she was so cool. But the way she just was who she was, without like kind of fear of what other people thought of her, was so empowering to me. So I remember the first time she, it wasn't even like a big deal, but it was like so quote unquote unchristian. She was wearing a tankini and she lifted up her shirt to show her like pregnancy belly and her little baby was kissing it. And I had, been so conditioned that you don't show skin at all. And here she was like celebrating her pregnancy.
Yeah.
And then there was another time where she voted for a Democrat and was proud of it. And she didn't apologize. She said, I actually think this is the best candidate. And I had never heard anyone in the Christian sphere say that.
Yeah.
And so for her just to be who she was and not make apologies for it gave me the courage to do the same. And I get messages very often from women who saying, you are giving me the courage to be myself and to empower myself. So absolutely, that's number one, empower yourself, believe in yourself, believe that you are worthy and that like God created you for a purpose, and don't let men or churches or whatever, like be brave enough to say, hey, actually, I think I'm worth more than that. And so I've stood up for myself in organizations where there was sexist language. And it's not easy. I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, this is easy. And they always respond really well, because the truth is they don't. But the fact is, while you're standing up for yourself, you are standing up for all women. And there's a quote by Maya Angelou that says every time you stand up for, oh gosh, I'm butchering this right now, but it's like each time a woman stands up for herself, she stands up for all women. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true. So that's the first thing, is just believe in yourself, stand up for yourself. Obviously do that with wisdom. But I think that's the first thing you can do, is empower yourself. Believe that you can do what God told you to do. Like if God gave you gifts that are quote unquote more masculine, if he gave you a gift for preaching or teaching or leading, I just empower you, encourage you to do those things.
To do it. That's right. You don't need anybody's permission.
No, you have God's. Like he's the one that
already
made
told you.
Right. So that's what I have to keep on going back to, is like, God gave me permission. I don't need your approval. I don't need whatever. I only need like God's approval to do this. And I obviously believe very much that this is what God has called me to do. And he took me on a journey around the world to teach me how important it is that we do stand up for women. So I think that's the first thing you can do. There are a ton of organizations out there, gosh, literally endless organizations out there that do things like empower women. So there's girls, lots of, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of girls don't have access to education. So you can get involved, research, study. I'd highly recommend the book Half the Sky. It will talk about all of, it's by Nicholas Kristof and his wife, Cheryl Boudin. And it just talks about the oppression that women face globally, but it gives tangible hands-on actions that you can do. And so I think that's another thing you can do. And also talk to your church about it. Like, I feel like advocating for women is so taboo in the church. Oh my gosh, I've had so much pushback with it. I can't even tell you.
Oh,
but
gosh. Yeah.
I think this is a conversation that needs to be had in the church. Like, hello,
Absolutely.
God is the God, like if we read the Gospels, like God cares so much for justice. Like just read Isaiah. This is just all about justice. And so I think the church should be leading the way in justice and social justice. And oftentimes we are way behind culture. And so I think having those conversations, if it needs to start small with like one other person, but like, get together in a group of empowered women and like talk to your pastor. Like, there's many things you can do, but like I said, number one is empowering yourself. The other thing is educate yourself about other women, and, get behind a cause that there's millions of them all over the world.
Yeah. Megan, I think you should maybe create a course on on how to go about talking to your pastor. Like, hey, how would you like how to talk to your church about this issue? Like, it's such a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think and one thing that I want to encourage our listeners to, and this is something that I've had to struggle with my journey, because as women, we get angry, and rightly so. We have every right to be angry. And I think that is what a lot of people can't see, like, oh, the angry feminist, like burn your bra, it's like you kind of get like pushed under a rug, like, oh, you're one of those. And then people just immediately write you off. And I think women in general struggle with their anger anyways. like struggle with, am I allowed to be angry? Because I've been told to be silent. I've been told to have manners. I've been told to be the good girl, and good girls don't get out of control and don't get angry. And angry like that is like a masculine quality or whatever. But one thing that I've had to really tune into and hone in on, or otherwise I've caught myself becoming like having a chip on my shoulder and getting bitter is, and I think this will be helpful in our approaches, is that most of the things that are happening with men or within the church or is not conscious. So it's like an unconscious societal narrative that has just been passed on. Like for so many men, they don't even realize that they're doing it. They don't realize that some of their views and the way that they live and the way they see the world is sexist or is not empowering of women. And so I think it's just like figuring out a way to start conversations that are like, hey, that are respectful and are like, hey, I just want to make you aware of this. Clearly you're not a female. So let me make you aware of how this is perceived from a female's perspective, you know? So it's like keeping that in mind, and like that most, and I say most, I say a lot of, because there are men that are chauvinistic and sexist for sure. We have a huge problem with toxic masculinity in our world, but a lot of the times they just don't know.
And so like with that, I want to kind of touch base on anger because, oh man, am I familiar with anger? After seeing, you know, I have seen the most heinous things happen to women. I've seen them sexually assaulted more times than I can count, right in front of me in bars. And of course I get angry. That's not something, I feel like that's actually God's like, hey, something's not right here.
There's a righteous anger.
And so I was actually talking to God about this because I was feeling, there's a while there that I just felt like I was drowning in anger. And I think there's a lot of minorities who have been dealing with this for a long time, I just felt like I was drowning in anger. I'm like, God, teach me about your anger, because I know that this is ultimately coming from you, but I'm not sure how to handle it. I'm not sure how to process it. And he told me, he said, Megan, like man's anger can get, you know, it can be a destructive force. It can burn bridges. It can close doors, build walls, whatever. And he's like, my anger actually creates a way where there wasn't a way. It builds bridges. And so actually, this podcast that I've started, the book I've written, my blog, this is all a product of my anger. But it's a way.
Your passion.
It's my passion. It's a constructive anger. And I talk about it with grace but I also speak directly. So I was invited to give a talk at my church because I go to a pretty great church to actually talk about women's equality. And of course I knew that I was going into a space where people would be upset by what I was about to say. And so how I started this is I just told stories and I started asking questions about those stories. So the first story I told was of a time where I was in working with women in a sex trade and had a man I was talking to a woman. I was partnering with an organization that took women from the sex trade and put them all the way through college. And so I was talking to this woman. It was her first night there. She wanted to leave. And as I was talking to her, these 6 drunk men came up and wanted to buy her. And she said no, because technically she had the right to say no. And they didn't take no for an answer. So I said no. We were both saying no. They were trying to grab her, and I'm like 5'2", like 120. I can't protect this woman. And so I just quickly decide to buy her, which is so crazy. So I take out my money, my team money, and she was $60 for the night. And so I go ahead and just buy her. And we were, the men had backed off. And so I was like, okay, what do you want to do now? And she's like, well, I would just like to go home and get some rest. She was a single mom, didn't have a way to provide for her children. And so she's like, I'm going to go ask my boss if I can leave now. So she goes downstairs, and I think her boss told her that she needed to leave with these men. And so I'm like, oh no. And so exactly. So I run outside and I confront these men, and I confront the like the managers of the bar, and I say, no, I bought her. That was my money. She doesn't go with these men. I have a right to her, which is just so crazy to argue about, right?
Yes.
So I argue with them and I end up winning the argument. She's allowed to go home. But in their anger, these men just end up grabbing another girl. Yeah. And I just remember feeling like I made the situation worse. Like, now these men were not only drunk, they were angry. And I knew what could happen to that one girl they just grabbed that night. Yeah. And that's when I first realized, like, I needed to fight the demands, because women, unfortunately, are so easily replaced in the sex trade. And I really felt like that was the night God's like, you need to fight the demand. You need to fight for equality. But so I told that story in the church, and I said, what do you think? Before, I didn't tell them the answer was equality, but I said, what do you think caused this story? Like, what were the results? And of course they said things like lust, which is also, like, that's valid. Mm-hmm. Pornography, also valid, but ultimately it's inequality, because you don't buy a person unless they're an object to you. And so I continued to just tell stories. I told the story of working with women who had FGM. I said, what causes this? And of course they had, like, you know, whatever answers they had, you know, like, oh, it's a tribal thing, it's traditional. Like, yes, all of that is true. But ultimately, what's driving this is the fact that women's bodies don't count for a man's. And then finally, I shared my own story of sexual assault that I shared earlier about when I was 13. And I said, what drives this? Like, what caused this? And again, they said, actually, I got victim blamed a lot. They're like, you should have known better. Like, you should have been walking by yourself. Yeah, I got victim blamed. And I was like, okay, well, this also happened to me in America in a public pool. Like, had my butt grabbed when I was like 14 years old. I have no idea who did it. Like, and he's like, oh, well, you're swimming in the wrong pool. And I'm like, no, you know,
I can swim in whatever pool I want to swim in.
Right. And so, like, ultimately, again, I got them to realize by asking these questions, what causes this, and getting them to see, actually, this is inequality. This is the thing that we can lace through all of these three different stories of oppression. Yeah. And so I think asking questions is one of the most neutralizing way to get people to come to their own conclusions, because you're painting a picture. Okay, so what's causing this? And if they see it's inequality, then you can easily make the jump to feminism, because feminism is fighting for the equality. So that's the way that I usually handle it, is I ask a lot of questions. I tell stories of my own experience, and I ask, what do you think caused that? And I find that it is pretty neutralizing. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. It's like just getting people to stop and think.
Right.
Getting to stop and think, and like, instead of arguments, like, let's just have conversations, and let's not be afraid of hard conversations either about this issue, because I just believe, and like, just to wrap this up, is that, and this is what I want everyone to know, and this is what I like trying to like tell people, is that when women are empowered, everyone benefits from that.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
Amen.
This is not like you're now that women are empowered, men are no longer empowered. Like, there's enough for everybody.
Right.
It's like, Oprah, you get a car, you get a car. Like, you get power, you get power. Like, everybody gets it. It's going to make your city a better place. It's going to make your home a better place.
Yes.
Like,
and there's so many studies out there. Again, read the book Half the Sky, but there's a lot of research. If you empower and educate women, that countries, on average, gross domestic product increases by up to 30%. So not only is it good for women, it's better for the economy. Studies show that in a lot of nations, if you give the income to the father, most of the income can oftentimes, so this study was done in sub-Saharan Africa, most of the income would go towards alcohol, but if you gave it to the mom, 80% of that would go back into her family and go to educating her family. And if you think about the countries that have the most empowerment towards women, they have the smallest rates of like creating terrorists or like harboring terrorists. That's a direct correlation. So if we think about empowering women, we spend all this money on the military, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying that there'd be less terrorists out there. Right. if we just empowered women. Like there'd be less terrorists if we, spent foreign aid to educate those women. Like there would be less like poverty in other nations if we just empowered women. There'd be less poverty in our own country if we empowered women. We'd have a better and stronger economy. And so you don't even have to take my word for it. Do some research. Google online, what happens when we empower women. And you guys, there is so many studies that proves that empowering women improves everyone's lives. And I think that's the way God designed it. Equality, absolutely. Co-heirs and equals. This is how God wants us to function. And we can see the curse of patriarchy. Actually, you're more prone to have poverty. You're more prone to have terrorism. And so we can see these direct correlations of what living under the curse is like versus living under how God designed it to be. So yes,
absolutely, that's so good.
Empowering women changes everything.
Also, I think because I think when people hear this, and we could literally, we could talk about this for hours for sure. Right. But when people hear the word patriarchy, they're like, well, the reason that's happened is because they think that God is a patriarchal God.
Right.
They're not in touch with the mother heart of God. He's the many-breasted one, yes. He is nurturing. There is a feminine aspect to God because we are both male and female created in his image.
Amen.
Okay. So, and even some translations, which, here's another one, who translated the Bible?
Right. Yes.
And who put the Bible together? A bunch of men.
Right.
Think about that for just a minute, but it's like, some translations actually say, and I mean, I don't know, who knows what the real answer is, that the word for the Holy Spirit is actually a feminine term.
It is. Yeah. I've heard that a lot actually. And it's interesting because you look at the church, a lot of church kind of denies the Holy Spirit. And I think that's another thing of patriarchy.
Yeah.
They're denying this feminine aspect of God. And gosh, look at where it's got us today. Like what would have happened if we allowed more women and minorities in the leaderships of our churches? Oh my gosh, I think it would be such a different place.
Absolutely.
It would be less judgmental, more welcoming, more kind, less hypocrisy. And I'm not saying that because I think men are evil. I'm just thinking that we need all voices to God made all of us in his image. So we need all of us to represent who God is. And right now, unfortunately, it's a lot of white men who are representing God. And there's some really good things that, that is, there's some really good study of theology and stuff like that. They're missing a lot of
that's just one perspective.
Right.
That's just one voice.
Right. They're missing a lot.
Yes. And it's like, I don't know who originally came up with this quote, but I have used it a lot and I don't know who it actually belongs to, but it says that true unity is diversity in harmony. So when you have diversity that's in harmony with one another, that's actually what true unity is. So if we want to talk about, everybody wants to talk about unity in the church, unity in the body. That's another reason why people don't like it when women start getting riled up and angry. Oh, you're trying to divide. You're trying to cause dissension. And like, no, this is about justice. This is about unity, actually, because there are people that are not being represented in this body or whatever. So I think that when we can view things from that place, we're all empowered, and I feel like that's what God's original design is. So, okay, Meghan, wow, this was so great. So good. Tell everybody where they can find you, how they can get more of Faith and Feminism.
Okay, so you can just Google in iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast, just Google Faith and Feminism. It will come up. And there's so much there that we've talked about. So that's one way. I have a blog, MeghanTschanz.com, MEGHANTSCHANZ. I know that's a crazy spelling, MeghanTschanz.com.
And we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes. And also you can just follow me on Instagram. And I love having these conversations. Today I just released a podcast on sex talk with a pelvic health therapist.
Ooh.
And oh my gosh, I learned so much about my own body that I thought I already, I thought I knew all that there is to know, but there's so much gold there. And I've been having conversations all day with women who, learned things that they never thought they knew, So anyways, those are the ways you can connect with me. I'd love to connect with you there.
So good. And you've got a Facebook group too, right?
I do. I have a Facebook group called Faith and Feminism. Just search it on Facebook.
Yeah.
There's about 500 of us there. And it's a safe place to, I know.
And I would say this, like, you know, and I'll even like come in there sometimes and I'll be like, my heart is broken over this. Like, what are we going to do? Right. I'm like, how are we going to change the world? You know, like you like stay on Facebook for 5 minutes and you see some of the ridiculousness that's out there.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. So like, if you are in the beginning stages of wondering what feminism is about, what biblical feminism, what it's like to be what it's like to be a Christian and a feminist, I would encourage you to come to that Facebook group because it's a safe place to just ask questions and to just, you know, figure this thing out together. So, okay, Meghan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it.
Absolutely.